In 1545, a Peruvian mountain began to bleed silver, and within a century, money itself stopped working the way it had for 1,000 years. Potosí, November 1545. An indigenous herder named Diego Hualpa followed a llama up a bare slope in the Andes. The animal had strayed. When he caught it, he noticed something glinting in the rocks. Silver, not a vein, an entire mountain honeycombed with it. Within weeks, word reached Spanish colonial officials in Lima. Within months, fortune seekers converged on the peak. Within 5 years, Potosí had become the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, larger than London, larger than Madrid, built on a mountain that would reshape global economics. But rewind, in the 1540s, Europe faced a problem. Not poverty, scarcity of currency. The medieval economy had been built on gold and silver, but gold was rare, silver was rarer, trade had grown faster than the money supply, merchants couldn't find enough metal to mint coins. Commerce was strangled by the lack of physical currency. Spain especially felt the squeeze. It needed money to fund wars, administration, and exploration. And then Potosí happened. The mountain contained roughly 40,000 tons of silver, an almost incomprehensible quantity. By 1570, Potosí was producing about 60% of the world's silver. That single mine flooded global markets with precious metal. Spanish galleons carried it across the Atlantic. Trade routes funneled it toward Europe. Some went to Asia, where silver was even more prized. The global money supply roughly doubled within a generation. That abundance created a crisis. Here's why. Money works because scarcity gives it value. When you flood the supply, each unit becomes less valuable. Prices began to rise, not dramatically at first, but persistently. Historians call this the price revolution. It began in Spain around 1560 and spread across Europe over the next century. Bread cost more, cloth cost more, labor cost more. The purchasing power of existing coins eroded steadily. The effect wasn't uniform. Some regions felt it earlier than others. Spain, closest to the silver supply, experienced inflation fastest. Prices there roughly tripled between 1550 and 1650. England, more insulated, saw slower increases, but nowhere escaped it. By the 1600s, the phenomenon was undeniable and widespread. Economists of the era didn't understand what was happening. They had no framework for thinking about inflation as a systemic problem caused by money supply. The real damage lay in what economists call the redistribution effect. Debtors benefited. If you'd borrowed money in 1550 to build a house, you could repay it decades later with currency worth far less. Your debt shrank in real terms, but creditors, merchants, and anyone on fixed incomes suffered. Landlords received rents that bought less each year. Nobles with fixed revenues watched their power diminish. The social order, built on stable wealth relationships, began to crack. Spain itself entered a peculiar trap. The silver arrived, yes, but Spain didn't manufacture much. It imported goods from the rest of Europe. So the silver flowed in, prices rose, and Spanish money leaked back out to pay for imports. Meanwhile, Spanish craftspeople couldn't compete with cheaper foreign goods. The nation grew wealthier on paper but hollowed out economically. By the 1600s, Spain was rich in metal and poor in production. The consequences rippled outward for centuries. The price revolution destabilized feudalism. Fixed incomes couldn't sustain the old aristocracy. Merchants and traders, who controlled the flow of goods and silver, gained relative power. The shift from land-based to commerce-based wealth accelerated. The modern capitalist economy, in some sense, was born from Potosí's silver. But the mountain itself paid a different price. Mining Potosí was brutal. The Spanish used a labor system called the mida. Indigenous men were required to work in the mines. Conditions were lethal: poor ventilation, unstable shafts, toxic dust, exhaustion. Historians estimate that roughly 8 million indigenous workers died in the mines between 1545 and 1810. The silver that funded empires was purchased with human lives on an industrial scale. The mountain itself began to fail by the late 1600s. Output declined. Shafts had to go deeper. Costs rose. By 1700, Potosí was no longer the world's dominant silver source. Other deposits in Mexico and South America came online. The boom had lasted roughly 150 years, long enough to reshape global economics, long enough to kill millions, long enough to make a mountain the hinge on which empires turned. What Potosí reveals is a principle that still governs economics today. Money is not neutral. Its supply directly affects prices, purchasing power, and the distribution of wealth. When money supply grows faster than production, inflation follows. When inflation is rapid and unexpected, winners and losers are created not by merit but by circumstance. Debtors win, creditors lose, savers lose, producers of goods win if they can raise prices faster than their costs rise. Potosí was the first global example of how a sudden increase in money supply destabilizes an entire economic system. It wasn't the last. Every major inflation episode in history, from the Continental Congress printing paper money in 1776 to post-World War I Germany to 1970s stagflation, follows a similar pattern. More money chases the same goods, prices rise, savers suffer. Debt becomes easier to repay, the social order shifts. The Potosí Silver Mountain teaches us that economies are not abstract. They are built on physical resources, human labor, and the choices societies make about how to distribute wealth. A mountain in Peru, mined to death by enslaved workers, reshaped London's prices, destabilized Spanish power, and created the conditions for modern capitalism. One mine, one mountain, one decision to extract and export. The consequences reverberated for centuries. Today, Potosí still exists. The mountain is largely exhausted. The city remains smaller now, economically depressed, but the legacy persists. Economists still study the price revolution. Historians still grapple with the human cost. And every time a government debates whether to expand the money supply, whether to print more currency, lower interest rates, or inject stimulus, the ghost of Potosí lingers in the conversation. The question remains the same: what happens when you flood the system with money? The answer, Potosí tells us, is complicated. Yes, more money can stimulate trade. Yes, it can help debtors. But it also erodes the value of existing savings. It destabilizes those on fixed incomes. It shifts wealth from creditors to borrowers. It makes long-term planning harder. And it does all of this invisibly, through the mechanism of rising prices, until the damage is already done. That's the real story of Potosí, not the silver itself, not the wealth, but the unintended consequences that followed when one mountain's bounty flooded the world. A reminder that in economics, as in geology, pressure builds in unexpected places, and when it releases, the landscape changes forever. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe for more economic histories that explain how past financial systems shape the world we live in today. Subscribe for more economic histories that explain how past financial systems shape the world we live in today. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.